Greetings, greetings. Thank you for joining me today. My name is David McPherson, and I've been doing a series of videos on spiritual topics. And the last one that I did involved the ascension process. And so I wanted to add a little something to that video, kind of giving you a sense of how the ascension looks and what you might expect, or how to notice perhaps that it's happening, that kind of thing. And so I made a list of 7 ascension scenarios over here. And right at the top, I put one of the most challenging scenarios is what I call the nervous breakdown, or this could also be called the dark night of the soul. And essentially, if you remember our video, and by the way, last time when I was demonstrating, I erased some of these traumas, but we need to add them back now because these scenarios are for beings like us that haven't really transmuted all this or worked on all these traumas, and so they're still there. So essentially this kind of a scenario is where you're here and you want to move up, your soul wants you to move up really quickly, and so these fears get triggered in a really big way all at once. And so it can manifest itself as being debilitated, not being able to control your emotions and feeling like you can no longer really function in the physical world very well for a little bit of time. And what's essentially happening is that these things are burning up so quickly and they're being felt so intensely, and so many of them are being felt all at once, that you feel like you can't really maneuver or function very well in the 3D world. But on the good side, you're actually moving up very quickly. Now, it's important, in order for you to see this in a positive way and to make this work for you, you need to be working with someone who understands what you're going through and doesn't try to treat you with drugs to suppress what's happening. I mean, you may need some medication to get through it, but they need to understand that underneath this is something good that's happening, and not that there's something wrong with you. Because if you're working with someone who feels that there's something wrong with you, then they could sort of explain this to you in such a way that, or they wouldn't explain this to you at all. They would just say, well, you're never going to work again, or you've got this major problem, and you may never be able to do this or that. And they'll give you a diagnosis, which is basically a limiting belief for you to hang on to. You don't want to do any of that. So it's important, if you're going through this kind of a scenario, to be around somebody who realizes that this is actually an amazing experience that can be moved through, and you want someone to guide you through it who's been through it, or who has connections to guides that can help you move through it. I went through something like this, and it was extremely helpful to have guides around and to talk to people who had been through something like this to give me a heads up about how it works, so that I didn't feel so desperate. Okay. Another thing that can happen is health issues. So when these traumas want to get your attention, especially if you're not paying attention to them, what will happen is, let's take a big trauma here. You see the size of that? It's pretty big. So if it's been sitting there a long time and nothing's been done, then what will happen is there may be like a little corresponding issue that will develop in your body. Like, let's say that's a heart. Let's say you haven't been very loving to yourself because you feel unworthy, because something happened to you at some point when you were younger, and you develop a heart issue, okay? Now, this is directly related to this, or it could be related to that, and so this is to get your attention to heal this, okay? And so you could have little issues come up, or health issues that want you to notice. If you've read Louise Hay's book, How to Heal Your Life, isn't that the title, Lucy?
You Can Heal Your Life.
You Can Heal Your Life. It has a lot of information about how all this works. It's been very valuable to Lucy and I. So that's a book that I definitely recommend. Another scenario that can happen is suppression, and then what I call shadow explosions. So this is when, let me erase the little heart attack symbol here first. Okay, all better. All right, so this is when you basically refuse to feel these things, you suppress them, and you, and this, by the way, this one is related to this one. See how I wrote suppression there? Because one of the main ways to suppress things, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is to find some kind of behavior that keeps them at bay, okay? And then do it a lot. That's what these are. Okay, but let's go back to this one. So basically, what you do is you find a way to ignore these emotions. But then what happens is when you get under stress, these bizarre behaviors will come out. And they're usually things that you would be very embarrassed about. Okay? And that's your shadow. Your shadow represents the things that you don't want other people to see. And so you suppress all these emotions, but it's kind of like a boiling pot. And that steam builds up pressure, and then it wants to get out somewhere. And that also relates to this down here, which is the anger portal, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is also another form of the shadow, in other words. But I'm going to connect that one with this one, projected anger. But essentially, you end up doing something that you wish you hadn't done because all this pressure's on you, and the situations in your life add to that pressure, and then something pops, and you end up doing something that you wish you hadn't done, whatever that is. So that's another scenario. Another scenario is anxiety, where you have all of these traumas, and so the things in your life, you're just constantly in fear and constantly worrying and turning over what ifs and afraid that something bad's going to happen. And essentially what happens is your nervous system is on red alert, and there's a lot of bodily symptoms with the adrenal glands and the heart rate and blood pressure that go along with that. And so your body is on red alert all the time because you're trying to control your environment and protect yourself. But because these are things that aren't really in your environment, you can't see them, you don't realize that these are really what's fueling the anxiety, okay? If you didn't have all these, if you healed some of these, the intensity of the anxiety would disappear or would be much less. So this is where you're just rapidly trying to think about things. Your mind is constantly racing. Maybe you even stay awake at night. I've had issues with this as well. I've had experience with a lot of these, by the way. And so your mind is racing. You're constantly thinking about things that are going to happen when there really isn't an imminent danger. Okay, the next ascension scenario is depression. And that's when you start to feel like there's nothing you can do about the things in your life, and you start to withdraw from what you normally would like to do. You kind of lack motivation. You lose your appreciation for things that you used to enjoy. By the way, that's another one that I've dealt with, so I have experience with that. And so, but it's because you feel so overwhelmed by these traumas that are combining with the scenarios in your current life, the present moments that you're experiencing, and they just feel too much. And so you kind of go into a kind of a cocoon, so to speak, or you kind of, you just sort of move out of your life and you don't know what to do, okay? And so that's another scenario. And by the way, these have been around, all these kinds of things have been around, but they become more intense with this, as we talked about, when this new energy comes in, and the new energy comes in and it says, okay, we got a clean house, it's time to get rid of these things. And so in order to clean house, these things have to be first identified. And in order for them to be identified, they're like alarm clocks. They get much louder. We talked about that last time. And so all of these symptoms are like alarm clocks. They're saying, pay attention, time to heal. Let's get rid of some of this stuff. We want to go up. We want to embody the soul. So we have to get rid of this stuff. And these are all ways to get your attention. And they will get your attention. I mean, if you've ever experienced any of these, you know that they will, if they're intense enough, they will stop you in your tracks and you will make a change in your life. And you probably know people, or perhaps you're one of the people that's had some of these things and it completely changed the direction of your life. That's the way it was for me. I've dealt with almost every one of these things on the list, and each time that I dealt with it, it completely changed the direction of my life for the better. It has made my life much better, but it did not feel pleasant at the time. So it's helpful to have someone who understands how to get you on the right track and how to interpret some of these things that are happening to you. I think I mentioned in the last video that that's what my wife and I do. She channels higher vibrational beings, beings that are of the vibration of your, similar to your soul or even higher, and they give you encouragement and they help you to see ways to move out of some of these scenarios. Okay, projected anger. I wrote this as a separate one because on the planet right now, this is a big one. Because anger is really the only accepted emotion, the only emotion, especially for men, by the way, that is considered to be okay. And so what you have on our planet right now is a lot of people that are angry all the time. Now underneath that anger is a lot of sadness, but since sadness is taboo in most cultures today, you're not supposed to cry or express that sadness. Instead, what you get is anger. And so, you know, there are a lot of issues on our planet right now related to this. So this could be anything from somebody going around the internet and posting mean messages on people's videos and just being kind of a mischief maker like that. It could be someone who gets involved with road rage. And by the way, road rage would be a shadow explosion, right? A lot of the people that have this road rage, they don't know where it comes from and they feel bad about it afterwards. Well, that's what this is, right? A shadow explosion. They don't know where it comes from because they're not aware of all this stuff, okay? But this is one of those things, you have people involved in a lot of violence, abuse. You have these school shootings that are happening. You have all these kinds of things that are happening because anger is really the only accepted form of emotional release. And by the way, when you project your anger onto someone else, it doesn't actually heal it. Okay, let's say this was one of the source right here. This doesn't go away, it's just a temporary thing. You have to go back to the root in an experience of being loving towards it and to transmute it, to get rid of it, okay? Otherwise it just stays. So if you get angry with other people and you judge other people and ridicule other people, you're not actually addressing the problem. And that's what's happening on our planet. A lot of anger is being expressed, but it's not healing the issue, okay? Addictions. Now, we talked about this with suppression, and essentially these are repetitive behaviors that help you to suppress the emotions. Drugs and alcohol, of course, are at the top of the list, but then it can be other things that seem good, like you could be a workaholic, you could exercise all the time. There are people that run, you know, like ultimate marathons and things like that, and exercise is a way to suppress your emotions. Now, it can be very good for you. You have to look at your own life and decide if it's in balance or if it's out of balance. If it's causing problems where you're avoiding other parts of your life, or other people feel neglected and they have a, you know, like your family, and you really do need to spend more time with them, then, you know, you may be dealing with an addiction. Sexual addictions, and then eating. You can also become addicted to eating and things like that. So, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a small list. But what these little behaviors do is they temporarily prevent you from feeling all this stuff. Okay? But because all this energy is coming in, it means that you have to do more of these addictive behaviors, or you have to do more of whichever addiction you have. So you see, this becomes more intense. And a lot of times, if you give up one serious addiction, but you don't deal with the issues, then you'll end up getting into some of these other ones that are considered to be less serious. Okay, I just wanted to add this video on so that you could see some of the scenarios related to an ascension and some of the reasons where I said, why should you care? And these are 7 scenarios that you may be familiar with, either in your life or someone else's life, that helps you to understand. If you understand the ascension process a little bit more, then you can figure out, how do I work with these so I can transmute it? And let's say you work with that. It doesn't just disappear. Transmuting means to turn it into a different form. So what actually happens if you transmute it is that energy comes back to you in the form of more vitality, unconditional love, So this void that we just erased actually becomes something good that flows back to you, your energy. And that blue energy moves you back up into who you truly are, which is the higher self or the soul, as we talked about last time. Okay? So these are the scenarios that I covered. These are things that you may want to be aware of. If you're dealing with any of these, you need to find that balance of what works for you and how to deal with them in such a way that you don't just deal with the symptom, but you find a way to get to the root causes. Okay? Or at least I would suggest that. That's what's worked for me anyway. Okay, thank you so much for your attention and your time. Thank you for sharing this space with me. And I send you blessings of love and peace. Thank you.